But let me just go through and introduce who we have here. And if you could just say 30 seconds or so about what your role is. So let's start with Josh Koenig down at the end here, who is Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel for SBA Communications.
All right, I'm down to 5 seconds. So yes, Josh Koenig, Chief Admin Officer and General Counsel at SBA, oversee our legal group as well as our corporate affairs, M&A, and a handful of other things at the company. But we are a independent owner of towers and other wireless infrastructure.
Great, thanks, Josh. Arpan is the Senior Counsel for FCC Chair Brendan Carr, and he's also the Chief AI Officer. So Arpan, do you want to explain your role?
Yeah, I basically wear 2 hats. I advise the chairman on spectrum, space, and technology issues covering the Wireless Bureau, Space Bureau, Office of Engineering and Technology, and the National Affairs Office. I separately have a role as Chief AI Officer, which I'm eager to talk about during this conversation.
Great. Thanks for being here, Arpan. Next up, we have John Kuzin, who is the SVP of Spectrum Policy and Regulatory Counsel for Qualcomm. John, you want to talk about what you do?
Sure. So I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm at the FCC, and I also oversee Qualcomm's global spectrum policy team.
Great. And last but not least, Matt Pearl, to my right here, who is the Director of Strategic Policies Program over at CSIS.
Yeah, so I basically cover any technology that has geostrategic significance vis-a-vis the People's Republic of China, other competitors and adversaries, and really work with policymakers, business leaders, and so on to make sure that the U.S. maintains its edge and we're adopting the right policies. Should also say I'm of counsel at Jenner and Block as well.
Great. Thank you for being here. So today, it's almost like Iago's speech laid this out perfectly, because we're going to talk about AI and the infrastructure and the intersection between the two. We're going to talk about spectrum. We're going to talk about 6G. We're going to talk about policy and the government's role, and to your point, the global race for AI leadership. So lots to dive into today. So WIA's position, and I was so glad that Iago mentioned this as well, but our fundamental core point is that wireless infrastructure is AI infrastructure. So if you leave here today with nothing else, that is the core point. And this is a jump ball. We heard a lot of basketball metaphors on the last panel. How do you think about the role of wireless infrastructure, big picture, for overall AI and its success?
I'll go first. As Iago laid out, the wireless infrastructure is absolutely critical to the success of AI. As you all know, no one plugs anything in anymore when you want to connect to the web. And that's just the way we live. And in addition to having a need to increase network infrastructure, and we're going to get into it according to what Mike laid out, spectrum is critically important. And then from Qualcomm's perspective, we're working on this, enabling this world where the devices in your pocket also have a high level of intelligence as well and work in concert with the network-based AI. And I'll get into that a little bit more, but it's absolutely critical to have advanced network infrastructure to support the continued growth of AI.
Sorry, go ahead.
So just to build on that, I think the AI race, in many ways, the focus has been on data centers. It's really actually going to come down to 2 things that are related. One is wireless connections at the edge, and the other is edge devices. And that's a synergistic thing, right? The more connections you have, the more latency you have, the more you have sensors, drones, all of these devices. And so ultimately, infrastructure is going to be where that happens, serving all those locations. And that's where you're going to both see inference take place, AI inference, which is going to be critical, and is going to potentially give the US an edge over the PRC, as well as actually just to have the latency for those use cases, because in many cases, unless it's close enough to the device, and John can get into this, it just won't, those use cases won't emerge from AI enabled devices.
Yeah, Yago referred to the smartphone revolution, and really what made these devices so critical to our lives is the mobile computing aspect of them, right? In addition to the talk and text, and AI is another use case for mobile computing, right? And it needs a delivery mechanism, and that's what wireless infrastructure is. And just like in prior economic booms that were more industrial in nature, you had roads and waterways paving the way for those. You need an enabler for the AI boom, and that is wireless connectivity.
So Josh, stay with you for 1 second. Under that theory and under the boom, how are you seeing the need for additional capacity playing out within the networks that you're building?
Well, we are certainly seeing an increased level of activity across the ecosystem, but I think there's going to be a lot more to come when the new types of devices that people have been referring to come online. Especially while spectrum is limited now, there's going to be a need for more coverage sites, and more sites means more towers, it means more fiber connections, more in-building solutions. So the level of activity is going to continue and amplify as more devices come online. The Ericsson study that we all refer to is again predicting wireless usage to more than double again by 2030. So that will prove to require a lot more infrastructure.
Right. Well, and along those lines, I mean, we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about policy. Let's figure out how we're going to make that happen. So Arpan, would love to welcome you into this. Chairman Carr's guiding principle so far has been the Build America agenda, which I think I will speak for WIA. We've really enjoyed seeing that come to light so far. How does the FCC see infrastructure contributing to our mission, and what is it doing to promote infrastructure generally through the Build America program?
Infrastructure is critical, and we're taking a variety of measures. But just to step back, in June, Chairman Carr had his Build America speech in Sioux Falls. And for the first time, he announced a unifying agenda that would span all of the functions of the agency. Build America has 6 pillars, but 3 of them are relevant today. So half of the agenda is very central to this conversation. One of the pillars is unleashing infrastructure builds. Another pillar is restoring America's leadership in wireless. And a third is reducing red tape. And when you put those 3 things together, you enable the kind of infrastructure that will allow America to lead in the AI age. And this is sorely needed because over the last couple of years, we have seen a lag in the development of infrastructure. Infrastructure on the ground is necessary to support digital technology. You need data centers, you need towers, you need energy. But with the BEAD program, with the CHIPS Act, you can see example after example where we were not able to build things in Earth due to regulatory sclerosis. And one of the elements of that regulatory sclerosis is the abuse of laws like NEPA. NEPA is a procedural statute that is supposed to apply to a very narrow category of activities. But in recent years, it has become a hotbed for abuse and litigation and slowing down clean energy projects, slowing down wireless infrastructure, slowing down other major projects that are necessary for America to compete at the global stage. And as an agency that has NEPA rules, it's incumbent upon us to take a fresh look at our rules to make sure that we're complying with the law, that we're acting within our very narrow lane, and that we're doing so to promote the public interest by spurring innovation and allowing the kind of infrastructure to be built that enhances network capacity. That's what we've started to do here at the FCC. Earlier this summer, we released a notice of proposed rulemaking that would seek to fundamentally overhaul the way we do NEPA regulation and come more in line with the narrow remit that Congress assigned to us. We also are taking a fresh look at our rules to preempt state and local regulations of wireless facilities. Congress gave us very sweeping and powerful tools to preempt state and local rules that prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting wireless infrastructure. We just voted that out a couple of months ago. And we have some other infrastructure items in queue. And so we're very excited to take this on and see a lot of opportunities here.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, certainly the influx of infrastructure policy has been notable and palpable as from the industry side and our views. And I will tell you that I've been doing this a long time, but I have never heard the term regulatory sclerosis before. I wrote that down on my paper here. So I appreciate that viewpoint. All right, so one more is kind of scene setting question. AI, hot topic, AI, we know. So it's hot topic. What, though, should we be talking about more? Is there something that we're missing in the AI policy topic that is really kind of under the radar, and or what is just getting too much discussion from a general level? Another jump ball.
I'll jump in. I mean, obviously, as we referred to before, we're not talking enough about the delivery mechanisms that AI will need. So certainly infrastructure is one area we should talk more about. As Arpan mentioned, we've got a great opportunity to codify a lot of the FCC rules and regulations that have come down in recent years to make that infrastructure deployment more efficient. There's not only going to be the need for new infrastructure, but to optimize existing infrastructure, to modify existing infrastructure. The type of 6G advances that Yago mentioned aren't going to be able to happen through poles and canisters and the type of stealth installation. So I think that we need to look at codifying the rules, referencing rules like 6401 or 6409 rather. And in addition to that, and actually one element of the Build America that I don't think you mentioned is workforce development. We need an AI-ready workforce. The workforce in telecom is very specialized as it is, and we've seen challenges in that. So we need to continue to train that workforce. We need to continue to make them ready to embrace AI. And we also need to start talking about how we utilize AI to make their lives better, to make them more efficient, and to make them safer. Our industry has real men and women that are out there in the field. They're climbing towers, they're building telecom infrastructure, and AI's got the capability to really enhance their jobs and make them safer.
So I would really highlight integrated sensing and communications. I think that's going to be a game changer, and outside of our community, people aren't talking about it. But that's everything from improving spectrum use to detecting first responders under rubble to everyone saw what Ukraine did to Russia with a cargo container of drones, right? Like if every commercial mobile network had the capability to detect those drones, that would be really critical for protecting our country. And so that's just a technology that folks aren't talking about that's absolutely critical, and we'll need access to spectrum and all these policies that we're talking about.
One of the things that I think is maybe underappreciated by those that don't really work on spectrum as much as a number of us up here do is that while the One Big Beautiful Bill set out a wonderful framework for opening up spectrum for the next several years, and it identifies certain bands that need to be studied, it identifies wide bands that need to be studied, which is critically important. That is actually step one, and a lot of work needs to happen here in America for us to keep pace with the rest of the world. The rest of the world today knows where they will be deploying 6G systems. In the US today, we have bands that we're looking at, but we still don't know what frequencies are going to actually be supporting 6G networks. A lot of work needs to occur. That work needs to start already. Another critical piece of that that's underappreciated is the importance of having industry work very closely with the federal agencies that are currently operating in the band, because that's how we're going to get to good solutions that open up spectrum that we need to deploy 6G in the 2029-2030 timeframe. Again, kudos to all of you here that helped pass the spectrum provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill. But now the hard work begins, and it is not going to be easy. But we know what the challenge is. We know how to achieve the goal. We now have to do it. And we're going to do it by working together early and often. And I think that what's underappreciated is just the amount of work that needs to occur. And it is not going to be easy to enable America to keep up with the rest of the world that will be deploying 6G in 2029, 2030.
If I could just add one thing quickly on that he's talking about sort of the front guard action. There's also the rear guard action we're dealing with right now in the NTIA. And some folks in Congress, a constituency that's trying to take us backward by inserting language in there. So we need to be mindful of that as well on spectrum.
Could you unpack a little bit more about what's going on with the NDA? Because I think it's an important element here.
You want to?
No, go for it.
I mean, obviously it's in flux. There's various language, but it's essentially taking bans off the table, bans that we're going to have to look at. And it has really important consequences for what John is talking about in terms of work in U.S. leadership, where, there are bans like 4 gigahertz, lower 7 gigahertz that could potentially be internationally harmonized. And so if you start taking bans like that off the table, it's really going to hamstring the U.S. and our ability to lead.
Yeah, let me just amplify on that a little bit. We lost our auction authority several years ago and went without it for several years thereafter. And we just got it back this summer. And that was supposed to reflect a political settlement. And so it would be quite odd and quite counterproductive to try to revisit that settlement. What's done is done. We have a spectrum roadmap for the next, decade. Let's now execute on that instead of trying to, go back and take another bite at the apple or secure better terms.
Right, and we heard Administrator Roth speak last week about introducing the 4 gigahertz band into the conversation as well, in addition to the 2.7 and the 7. So there's a lot of interplay, even with what you just said, some of the potential legislation and how all of that would work. It's a really complicated puzzle out there, but I will say that you all have seamlessly segged into the AI spectrum and 6G discussion. So well done. But let's talk about 6G. Let's talk about AI. From my understanding, the two are really going to go hand in hand. Can someone explain how that's going to work, how the two are going to be codependent on each other, and what we need to do about it from a policy basis?
I'll take a crack, and I'll try to be brief. So the 4 main drivers of mobile data growth are mobile gaming, increased video consumption on your devices of higher quality video, XR, eyewear, connected directly to the cloud, and AI. We're seeing with regard to XR, the Ray-Ban glasses, Samsung announced new eyewear yesterday. These devices, as Yago laid out and others have mentioned on the previous panel, they're going to generate a very high amount of uplink traffic. Think about wearing glasses, watching your kids play soccer, and being able to stream the game to grandparents who can't make it to the game or could be on the other side of the world. My favorite XR application is going to a sporting event and being able to watch that sporting event, it's a World Series time now, being able to watch a baseball game from the perspective of the umpire or the second baseman. And you're thinking, why do I even need to go to the stadium in that case? You don't. But with high quality, high capacity networks, you could have these capabilities. They're going to essentially require a re-engineered network where you're going to have a lot more uplink demand. Now let's talk about AI. Why is AI, why do you need a lot of heavy networking for for AI connectivity. What we're going to be doing with these agents that have been mentioned is you're going to instruct an AI agent and give it a task, and it's going to go off and do this task for all of us. For each of us are going to have our own various tasks. That is going to generate a hell of a lot of traffic. And you might be sitting there going, what the hell am I talking about? Well, here's one example. You say, I want to go on a vacation within the next 6 months. I want to leave on a Thursday or Friday, come back on a Monday or Tuesday, want to go to Maui, want to stay at a Hilton or Marriott property, want to fly on these airlines, and I don't want to spend more than X. That agent goes off, and what is it doing? It's doing what you would do on a Saturday morning in your own house, waste 2 to 3 hours planning your vacation. Well, if we all have that capability, we're all going to take advantage of it. And that's just a little example. That little example shows you why AI is going to drive massive increases in mobile data. Estimates show that in 2033, a third of all mobile traffic will be AI related. I'll leave it there.
Other thoughts?
No, it's the new use cases. You've heard about the glasses. We know about the new smart ear pods that are capable of translation, and if they're capable of translation, they're capable of transcription. And I can barely listen to one conversation at a time. They're always going to be on, and they're always going to be computing, and we're always going to want access to those agents. So it just underscores the upcoming demand on the networks and the delivery mechanisms that those machines will need.
When we're talking about the intersection of 6G and AI, it's just important to begin with the caveat that standards are still under development, and to some extent we're projecting. But there are a couple of elements of that intersection between 6G and AI that we feel reasonably confident we know right now. The first is that AI is going to be baked into the 6G network intelligence. The second is that AI is going to create a huge spike in traffic. And then the third is that we know that these 6G networks are going to be designed to be both intermodal and multimodal in nature. So when you think about it from the perspective of policy, what can you do to foster our 6G future? First, don't make network intelligence illegal. And we, fortunately, a court struck down the previous administration's Title II rules, which would have threatened network slicing, among other things. So don't get in the way. Number two, focus on the bread and butter issues of spectrum and infrastructure. We talked about that, but there are only just a few ways that you can increase capacity: spectrum, infrastructure, and squeezing more out of your technical rules. So you can't lose focus on the fundamentals. And then third, focus on intermodal and multimodal competition. You're seeing that in the market. We need to change the way we look at competition and recognize that maybe the layer cake won't be 3 terrestrial bands. Maybe it'll be a mixture of satellite and terrestrial. Understand that business combinations are happening between providers that used to live in drastically different regulatory silos. And turn off like this sort of old blinkered mentality where different services don't exist in the same competitive landscape. Those are things that we can do now and that we are trying to do right now, which I think will clear the way for 6G adoption.
Yeah, that's good. So, John, question for you. You talked about spectrum and the need to get it right. Is that at the top of your policy wish list?
Yes.
Is there anything else on your policy wish list?
Well, after it all kind of flows from spectrum, and folks will say, what will happen? Let's just say the U.S. Doesn't open up spectrum for 6G in a meaningful way. And what we're talking about are blocks of spectrum between 200 to 400 megahertz wide per carrier by 2030 for there to be meaningful deployments. So what's going to happen if that doesn't happen? Well, it's not like the networks are going to stop working. But what's going to happen is you will experience delay. And I read a study showing that 10 years ago, Many of us would wait a few seconds for something to load. Now you wait less than a second, okay? But just by nature of things being delayed, it's going to impact the technical feasibility, the success of many new applications. The latency will suffer, the response time. So I can't tell you now what's going to break or what's not, but for those countries that have high capacity, low latency, highly reliable networks based on wide channels, they're going to have a lot more benefits and the ability to build new applications and services that at some point in the US will be very problematic because the networks will be increasingly strained.
Thank you. Matt, let me bring you in just for a bit of a different perspective. And you wrote a fascinating article recently, 2 weeks ago, thereabouts. It's very relevant if you just listen to this title. 6G and AI, how wireless technology and edge devices are shaping the global race. So what prompted you to write this, and what are your big takeaways? And tell us more about the national security angles that come with 6G and leadership there.
Yeah, so I think two things. I mean, one is to write about 6G, which, as Arpan mentioned, it's still developing, right? But to get excited, to get people in DC, policymakers on the Hill, in the administration, excited about the technology, right? Like that's where it starts, is understanding that something is coming, it's significant, that's going to create an impetus. And then secondly, to essentially, for a lot of what we're talking, spectrum, workforce, and so on, to really make the case that it's a national security issue for several different reasons, right? It's a national security issue from the standpoint of technological development, economic growth, AI deployment, all the things we're talking about. It's also a national security issue from the standpoint of like literally what our military is going to use. Yesterday, I was at the U.S.-Taiwan Defense Conference, very different crowd than this, right? Like a lot of military people, a lot of defense industrial base people. And I was on an electronic warfare panel. And the person who shall remain nameless from the defense industrial base was proudly saying how they were designing an EW system that used a lot of off-the-shelf hardware. And the reason that he was saying that was because their extremely exquisite systems in Ukraine are getting killed by the Russians, right? And so we need this commercial technology using AI, sensors, wireless devices to develop. And then our military, our companies that are building things for the military can literally like leverage that to defeat the PRC. And so there are just so many different angles to it. And unfortunately in DC, people tend to like chase like one or two problems. And so as I mentioned, and Arpan has mentioned, people have been really focused on data centers. They've been really focused on energy. Those are both important, but we have all of these other bottlenecks, spectrum, workforce, other things. And quite frankly, the PRC and some of our other competitors don't have that problem.
Yeah, we use the word convergence a lot in our industry, and I think the theme that's emerging here is we need a convergence of regulatory agendas as well, because you simply can't talk about AI without talking about 6G, without talking about workforce development, without talking about infrastructure. And there's going to be a lot of resources that are expended in the coming decade on all of these things. And those resources need to be spent efficiently, right? So that we end up looking back and seeing the true potential of these technologies being unleashed and being unleashed in a way that is economically efficient.
Any other comments? All right, Arpan, I want to come back to you. And I realized I was remiss. I mean, we are in the middle of a government shutdown, so we truly appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. So thank you for this. I know it's difficult times all around and hoping to see the FCC back at full strength soon. So much appreciated there. But hoping you can spend a minute now talking about the FCC. What is the FCC's role when it comes to AI? Can you and you've got a very interesting title, Chief AI Officer. What does that mean? How do you see the agency, and what's your role in all of that?
So on the issue of AI, the FCC has an inward-facing role and an outward-facing role. Let me talk about each of those. I'll start with the inward-facing role. How do we use AI within the agency? And that's where my title comes in as Chief AI Officer. For the first time, every federal agency had to designate a Chief AI Officer, and their formal responsibility is to drive innovation, adoption, and governance of AI within federal agencies, and that's what I do. Essentially, in my role, I set the strategic vision for how we think the agency should be using AI, and then leverage expertise across the agency to make it happen. Here are a couple of things that I think we're going to try to do here at the agency to start. First, we're going to focus on manageable, easy problems that have high leverage. Second, we're going to focus on augmenting our workforce, not necessarily replacing them. This is a net add. We view that as such. Third, we're going to focus on products and not just technology deployment. We're going to focus on solutions that make the lives of our staff easier, that make this place a better place to work, and focusing on improving outcomes. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here at the federal government is serve the public more effectively, to be faster on applications, to be faster in decision making, to be more accurate in the kinds of decisions that we make. And we'll be looking at the technology suite with all of those things in mind. I'm pleased to say that the government has stood up an AI council where there's information and code sharing, where there's off the shelf security compliant solutions that can be rolled out, expertise that we can draw on. And that's making this journey easier. We're not going it alone. There's some sort of support system there to make sure that agencies are doing this the right way.
That's great. And if there's anything we can do to incorporate AI into ULS or some way, bring that into the 21st century, we're all about that too. Well, but staying with you, Arpin, for a second, we've got President Trump AI Action Plan, which is probably the ultimate federal guidance that we have out there now. And one of the, I think, fascinating pieces of it was that it calls for the FCC to evaluate the impact of state regulatory actions on America's AI future. So can you elaborate on that charge, how the FCC is thinking about that and how you're thinking about responding?
So I mentioned a preemption item. There are actually two preemption items from earlier, just a couple of months ago. There's a wireless preemption item and a wireline preemption item. And in both of those, we seek comment on our preemption authorities under sections 253 and 332 of the Communications Act. Congress gave us sweeping authority to preempt state and local regulations that prohibit or effectively prohibit telecommunication services and personal wireless services. And consistent with the charge in the AI Action Plan, those two items seek comment on the extent to which our statutory authorities would extend to AI. And so, it's a very interesting question. We look forward to the record developing on that.
Well, and so I will toss this out to the group. And I think as us in the wireless infrastructure space, we are well aware that there's a federal rubric, but there's also state law, and there's a local aspect to this too, because infrastructure is inherently local when you're placing something in someone's backyard. So there's a lot of different regulatory constructs that are flying around out there. But how do we, so I think we all want our AI future to succeed as a nation, but there are different views, even at the federal level, as to how to get there. Then there's all these different state views, which you may or may not have a role in preempting to the extent that they have a negative effect. And there could be local rules too. So how do we deal with the potential for a fragmented regulatory, political, legal policy arena when it comes to AI moving forward? Any thoughts?
It's a difficult challenge, Mike. I mean, as you said, it is in our industry, it is a fundamental tenet that you're going to have state and local regulations to comply with. Zoning is, a part of our fabric as a society, and we're used to dealing with that. But the FCC over the years has done a great job in partnering with the industry to identify bad regulation, because bad regulation does exist. So, it's, as it always is, it's going to be about finding the balance and, supporting good regulation that enables communities to help determine how they look and how they're run, but at the same time not standing in the way of the wireless deployment and the technology that's going to take us into the future. And so that should be, again, to my earlier point, it's about the efficient allocation of resources, the efficient and sensical deployment of infrastructure. But I think the FCC stands in a very good position right now with an opportunity to codify a lot of the rulemaking it's done in the past, working together with Congress. And we look forward to partnering with the FCC and our legislators to strike that proper balance.
Yeah, I think the key word here is Congress, right? This isn't, I'm not trying to dodge it, but they set the rules for what's federal and what's state and local, and they've put their thumb on the scale when they did the 96 Act and federalized a lot of telecommunications policy, recognizing the inherently interstate nature of our networks. It's also reinforced in the preemption provisions that I mentioned earlier. And so, here at the agency, we intend to follow Congress's instructions and, comply with the guardrails that it's set.
Yeah, and I would say from our perspective, from the WIA perspective, we're also looking to Congress really to, one, let's codify with the great work that the FCC's done really on a bipartisan basis since 2009 to set the shot clocks for new towers, just as importantly for co-locating on existing infrastructure. It's the fastest, most efficient way to get things out there. So we're working with Congress on that front now. I know our CEO, Patrick Halley, had a hearing on that, but I hear you that Congress needs to step in, and to the extent that there are more of a framework that we need to be thinking about. It does seem like the role there. Let's stay with Congress and general government officials. So all of you talk with government officials on a regular basis. What are some common misconceptions that you're hearing about AI? Anything?
I mean, I'll jump in and go first. That AI is only about the software, right? And at first blush, I think a lot of folks miss the entire ecosystem that's represented, in this room, and that's been talked about in this panel. I also think there is a misconception that that the networks are ready for it all. And as we've discussed, there's going to be tremendous burden on the networks, and there's going to need to be continued investment. So we need the regulators to understand that and to work with us to make that happen in an effective way. And again, as I mentioned before, there's also a lack of focus on the people element of AI. There's a lot of discussion about AI replacing people, but not enough discussion about preparing the workforce to leverage AI. And I think that's really important, particularly in the industries represented in this room.
So I should start by saying that there are so many really dedicated public servants who do know this stuff and don't ask stupid questions or have misconceptions. And so, Administrator Roth, Robin Caldwell, Ryan Bash, just incredibly thoughtful questions. I will say that, you do get questions from others who maybe aren't as educated, just a misconception that sort of LEO networks are going to solve this and can reach everywhere and do everything. And I'm a huge advocate for LEO networks. They have incredible geostrategic significance. I have, the utmost respect for what those companies have accomplished. And so it's not to downplay that, but in terms of the density of use that we need for all the things we're talking about, that's not going to be sufficient. And so sometimes there's a misconception there.
One thing that I would say that
You can just turn it off. It was on before.
Hello? Thank you. I wouldn't say that there's a misconception, but I would say there's an underappreciation of the importance of edge AI and on-device AI. Yago rightly said when in his keynote that network-based AI is 18 to 24 months ahead of what you can do at the edge or on devices. That said, edge devices are going to play a very important role in the success of AI. If everything you do with regard to AI has to ping the network will be overwhelmed. So today, we're all using edge AI, on-device AI. Your devices today can do real-time translation. You could have a conversation with someone in another language and hear their language being translated and engage in a conversation. You can shut off your Wi-Fi or 5G connection and your device will continue to perform. A lot of the things you do also on your device, like let me see how my living room would look with this color, or how does this dress or this suit look on me? All of that can be done on the device without any connection to the network. And by doing AI inference, running searches on the devices, you are saving energy, you're saving network assets, you're saving water, and the latency is close to zero because you do not have to wait for the network to respond. There's a lot of benefits. Two other very important benefits is by having your data on the device, it's safer and more private. So those are like some other benefits. Nonetheless, Qualcomm's also in the data center business, right? So we're interested in seeing both, but you're going to need both. This hybrid AI functionality where you have edge devices with AI as well as network-based AI working in concert is how this is going to scale. What's the right percentage? What's the right amount? I don't know, but we do need to recognize that edge devices are going to play a critically important role.
All right. So let's switch a little bit to the, just in interest of time, the global race for AI leadership. So Matt, I've heard you mention China a couple of times today. When we talk about the AI race, I think when we had the race to 5G, it was the US versus China. Is it still a two-country race? Are there other countries we need to be thinking about in this?
I would say that it's primarily China. We have partners that are making spectrum available and have great ambitions like India, but that's very different, right? Where it's not an adversarial relationship. So it still is the PRC, and they have a lot of advantages. Unfortunately, right? They can just essentially like mandate that companies use a bunch of IoT devices and sensors, right? And that's at least for a time going to really spur their deployment, right? So. As well as having that command and control ability on spectrum. So ultimately, our system is better, right? Like I believe in it, and we're going to prevail. But yeah, they bring a lot to the table and are the main concern.
So just to put a fine point on it, what exactly is the importance of us winning? And the second point is, and I would start with Matt, but if anybody else has opinions, I'd love to hear them. How will we know when we've won?
So the importance of winning is two things. One is just overall U.S. economic technological leadership, right, which we've had for the last 70 years, right? And so, that just having that role on the world stage. But then, as I mentioned, just militarily, we have a situation in the South Pacific with Taiwan that could turn hot, and having that technology to deter the PRC, or God forbid, in the event of a conflict, having those wireless capabilities that developed here in the commercial sector is absolutely critical. How we won, there are a million different metrics, but I would say that the first thing that I would look to, if you look at 4G, how we won is we made 700 megahertz available before any other country. And then we had this incredible app ecosystem and economy that grew up, right? And so it was just obvious that we had won because you had billion-dollar companies that were built off of that, right? And so it's having that whole ecosystem of use cases and applications, and then American and allied countries around it that are successful.
Any other thoughts?
And I think the importance of winning per se is, or I would say leading, is that we're defining our own destiny. And what we have seen so often at the intersection of technology and public policy, which is what this panel is about, is, in this global economy we're living in, those regions, those countries that lead, that move first, define standards that the rest of us either have to work to change and work backwards from, or live within. So I think we are well positioned to lead at the forefront, not only of technology, but in how we use that technology to actually add value, and how we do it in a way that is orderly and overall good for our economy and our society.
Well, I'm hoping one day I'll just wake up to a text message from you, Matt, that just says we won, and I'll know what that is. All right. So to wrap things up, and I do think we can win. Certainly leadership, to your point, Josh, if we get right a lot of the policies that we've talked about today. Ian asked this, and I want to ask the same thing to everyone here. What's the AI policy question that keeps you up at night?
There's a lag between the state of technology and then the state of social practices, like how do you educate your kids? What do you do about workforce? And then also the state of sort of legal regulation. And there's a mismatch between social practice, legal practice, and technological practice. And I worry that lag may lead to side effects. It's as regulators, we need to keep pace, but not overcorrect or overpredict. And, as a society, we need to be adjusting and, building technology to match our values. And, sometimes there's a period of settling out that happens, and we need to make sure that we're sort of mindful of that.
That's a really good one.
Yeah, I think to build on that, for me, it's the Brussels sandwich, right? It's the difficulty that companies have complying with the combination of EU regulations as well as California and other states, and it's just a real challenge, understandably. Congress has a role, right? The administration has a role vis-a-vis the EU, and obviously there are different legislators that have different values, but one of the things that I think is so important when you look at the EU or state legislation is like, what is the actual goal? Because oftentimes there are, all these categories and all these restrictions and, but it's sort of like there's not necessarily always a match between all of those regulations and like actually achieving some sort of goal that the public is going to value.
I think it's all of that's right. It's really, are we moving at the right pace, and are we investing in the right things? And I think these gentlemen have said it very well.
The reason why I turned to Josh to answer is because I was going to flip the question, and I was going to basically say, how cool is it that we all get to work on this stuff, right? And we're, to quote Lin-Manuel Miranda, how wonderful it is to be alive right now. I mean, there's a lot of cool shit going on, and it's wonderful that we're working to enable that. So I have no trouble going to bed at night. I do have a little bit of trouble when I get up at 4 a.m. going back to bed because my mind starts working, but it's a wonderful time to be working on these issues. It's a very exciting time, and I wouldn't want to be alive at any other moment than right now.
And I think it's just such an exciting time for anyone who's just a geek about the whole telecom ecosystem, right? We're talking about LEO networks, we're talking about terrestrial wireless network, like just all of these things coming together and being integrated in terms of standards and really seamlessly providing services to everyone, and being greater than the sum of their parts is just incredibly exciting.
All right. We have time for one question, but that was such a good place to end. I'm a little torn. So I think we can just be done here. And let's thank everyone for their contributions today.